Hi, Greg, and welcome to the show. Tell us, how do we start a movement?
Well, thanks for having me.
Greg answers that, I've got to tell you something. What Greg is going to tell you is really powerful stuff. So use it carefully. Like they said, with great power comes great responsibility. You could be starting revolutions and movements in your company or in your country with this information. So use it carefully and don't forget to subscribe. Hear the interview, be careful, and buy Greg's book, Cascade.
The number one thing to start a movement is you'll have to have a cause. All too often people, they start with trying to figure out what a slogan is, or Martin Luther King or Gandhi or somebody like this to be that you need some iconic figure. What you first need is a cause that people really care about. I'd say that's the first step. Start with something that you genuinely care about and that people around you care about as well. There's an entire chapter in the book about Gandhi and about how, when he came back to India, he created a movement and called for a nationwide series of strikes that are called hartals in India. And it was an absolute disaster. It was terrible. He referred to it as his Himalayan miscalculation. It ended in a horrible, horrible massacre at Amritsar. And 10 years later, when the Indian National Congress came to him to start a series of to start another movement, to start a campaign of civil disobedience, he remembered that and he learned from it. And because he learned from it, that's what became the Salt March, which everybody else thought was ridiculous. Nobody took that seriously. But what Gandhi understood is that was a keystone change. That was the change that would build the bridge from the grievance of wanting to be free of the Brits to the vision of full independence. And once people saw that the British could be defied, independence was just a matter of time. And I think that's another thing that most people don't understand about movements. As the name implies, they are kinetic. They change over time. And successful revolutionaries, whether in a country or in an organization, they learn from their mistakes along the way. There's so many movements out there today, whether it's Occupy or Black Lives Matter, they go from failure to failure to failure, and they never ever seem to learn. Again, this is true in a political revolution, a social movement, or an organizational transformation. The righteousness of your cause will not save you. You need to learn how to organize a movement for change.
So let's take the Black Lives Matter movement, since you mentioned it. What do you think could be done differently to make it more appealing or get it to its logical conclusion?
They make a couple of key mistakes. So is this shift from differentiating values, which makes you passionate about an idea, to shared values that helps bring people in. So let's look at something like the LGBTQ movement. For years, they were rallying around, we're here, we're queer, we're different. And that made people feel really good about the movement. But it was only when they started talking about raising healthy, happy families and living in committed relationships. We want the same thing everybody else wants, that they started to gain traction. Very similar. We see this in lots of organizations focusing today on agile development and creating agile transformations within their organization. And they always start out talking about the Agile Manifesto, which people within the Agile community are very passionate about. People outside the Agile community doesn't mean anything, or it just seems really strange. So you need to focus on the shared values of, better quality projects done faster and cheaper. So with Black Lives Matter, they're focusing very much on things that rile up, that differentiating values. Defund the police, which to most people, defunding no police, that sounds like anarchy. Where they need to focus on shared values. So then comes the next question. How do you identify those shared values? And this is where the magic comes in. You listen to your most active opposition, the people who hate your change, right? So if you look at LGBTQ, the people who were actively opposing them, they were constantly talking about family values. How did the movement win? Family values. So if you look at Black Lives Matter today, and this is just one thing, there's also lots of tactical things that we don't have time for, but what are people who don't like the movement, what are they saying, right? Safety, neighborhoods. Well, Black Lives Matter, they can focus on, it's not about defunding the police, it's about safe neighborhoods. And how can neighborhoods be safe if people are afraid of the police? The police are the wrong target. People want the police to protect them. A much more juicy target are police unions who defend the bad cops.
Mm-hmm. So you have really outlined 6 steps, which are really amazing steps that can lead to creating a movement that drives transformational change. Tell us.
Right. So they're not steps; they're more like principles. And I don't want to. In the time we have, I'd like to focus on just a couple of principles. The keystone change, we already went over. So you need to start off with. Always start off, what's the grievance? And then once you have that grievance, what's the vision of tomorrow? So often people come to us, they're very sure about the grievance, but not the vision. But a lot of times people come to us with the vision, very common in agile transformations, and not quite so clear on what the grievance is, why this change needs to happen. And the vision always has to be aspirational. There should never be metrics associated with that vision. But the keystone change is what builds that bridge. You need to make a plan. There are 2 tools that go back decades, been around for decades, which we explain in the book called The Spectrum of Allies and Pillars of Support. You use them. You're always mobilizing somebody to influence something. You're always mobilizing people to influence institutions. Those are the 2 things you need to ask about every action you take. Who are we mobilizing to influence what? You think about something like the Occupy movement. They mobilized people. They forgot about institutions. Matter of fact, they eschewed institutions. Values, right? You need to be clear on your values. Big problem with the Me Too movement, because values are constraints. So how are you going to constrain yourself? Again, back to Gandhi. Very clear about how he was constraining himself, and that gave his movement credibility. Weaving the network, that's how you scale change. Always about giving people co-optable resources that they can use to make the movement themselves. And finally, surviving victory. The victory phase is often the most dangerous phase. When we get our program, we get a budget for our program or executive sponsorship, we think everything's going to be downhill from there. Often that's when things become really difficult. So you need to think from the beginning, how would an evil person undermine the change I seek? Where am I vulnerable? And then how do I go back to shared values to overcome that resistance? And that's the 2-minute synopsis, 15 years of work.
Wow. I would really love you to talk a little bit about, the concept of coupled oscillation, the impact.
That's a mystery that was around for centuries. and it was a mystery that was solved by two mathematicians in the late 90s named Duncan Watts and Steve Strogatz, and gave rise to this idea of small world networks. And that's why the book is called Cascades, because what they described is how this network cascade, like a wave at a stadium, how it actually works. And that's the sort of underlying science of what drives a movement. As it turns out, what drives a movement is, and what drives transformation is exactly the opposite of what the change consultants have been telling us all this time. It's small groups, loosely connected, but united by a shared purpose. So that's what you really want to focus on. Identifying small groups who are already enthusiastic about this idea, empowering them to link with other groups and drive change forward around a shared purpose.
So you talk about two main pillars in your book about making a plan, which is like the spectrum of allies and the pillars of support.
Well, that's what forms the basis for your tactics, right? Every tactic needs to go back to those two things. All of them, I would say, they're all different pieces to the puzzle. And what I found fascinating was all the movements I looked at, whether that was Gandhi in India or Mandela in South Africa, or Lou Gerstner at IBM, or more recent movements at Procter & Gamble and Experian. All of them started off with very, very different ideas for change, very different personalities, philosophies, different in every way you can imagine. They all made mistakes, but they all ended up with the same principles that allowed them to succeed. So, for instance, values are extremely important. If you look at Mandela and the and anti-apartheid, they came up with something called the Freedom Charter, which became the basis for the entire movement going forward. Mandela would say, because for decades Mandela was called a communist, an extremist, an anarchist, and he would always say, listen, nobody needs to guess what I believe, because it was all written down back in 1955. Because if you're not willing to incur any costs, it's not something you really value. Lou Gerstner, he said, we're going to value the customer. And then he said, and we're going to forego revenue on every sale to do it. And when ask anybody who worked at IBM in the 90s, and they will tell you, A, that was made 100% clear to them, and B, it's probably the one reason IBM is still in business today, because that's what made everything credible. So unless you're willing to say, we're willing to incur these costs, Gandhi said, we're willing to be nonviolent, even in the face of violence done upon us, because satyagraha is always about the force of truth, not who's stronger. That's what gives your movement credibility, or your transformation plan credibility. But what I think the contribution of Cascades is then going and saying, would these same principles work in an organizational, institutional, or industrial setting? And what I found was, not only do they work, as it turns out, they seem to be the only thing that does work. And the work we've done since the book has come out has really been earth-shattering about how we can go into organizations and drive change that nobody thought was possible.
Well, Greg, thank you so much. It's absolutely been a pleasure talking to you. And this book has really, it would change anybody's mind to hear it or to read it, because it's such a transformational book. So anybody listening, I think they should all read Cascades. So thank you so much, Greg, for coming on our show.